The van rolled over cracked asphalt, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn fog that clung to the perimeter of the Georgia State Penitentiary. A place whispered about in hushed tones across the country, feared even among hardened criminals. Known by inmates as the Black Hole, it had a reputation so terrifying that even the most violent offenders claimed it could break a person mentally before their sentence could finish them physically. Inside the van, Michael Ortega, a transfer from a maximum security facility in Alabama, sat hunched, fists clenched over his knees, staring at the cement walls through the small barred window. His mind raced, recalling the rumors. Inmates never lasted longer than 6 months without breaking, and some didn't survive at all. The guards laughed as they watched him squirm, but they didn't say a word about the real danger, the prisoners themselves. This was a place where trust was a weapon and every shadow concealed a threat. The gates of the penitentiary loomed ahead. Towering steel fences topped with razor wire gleamed ominously in the dim light. As the van stopped and the doors creaked open, the smell hit first, stale sweat, rotting food, and an undercurrent of something metallic. Blood, perhaps. Ortega's stomach churned. He'd survived stabbings, riots, and lockdowns, but nothing prepared him for this. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary hum of prison life, no chatter, no distant clang of doors. Just a suffocating quiet. The guards marched him into a narrow hallway, walls painted appealing, institutional gray. Lights flickered above, casting long, unpredictable shadows. From somewhere deep in the facility, a low, guttural scream echoed, and then silence again. A warning. Ortega knew it without knowing how. Here, every sound carried meaning. By the time he reached his cell, he had seen the first signs. Scratches on the walls. Messages in code only inmates could read. Bloodstains partially cleaned, indicating a recent altercation. The smell lingered long after he passed. And in the corner, he glimpsed a prisoner standing still, eyes black as coal, staring from the darkness. Not moving, not breathing audibly, just watching. It was a test. Ortega realized quickly. The second you flinch, they notice. Inside his cell, the cold metal bed frame pressed against his spine. He examined the bars and the lock. Standard issue, but it felt like it could be pried open with the right leverage, or broken with enough determination. The walls themselves seemed to absorb sound, muffling anything that happened outside. He had no idea how long anyone had survived in here, and that uncertainty gnawed at him worse than hunger or thirst. Across the hall, a commotion erupted. Ortega leaned toward the bars, listening. A fight, brutal, unrestrained. Screams, grunts, a crash of bodies hitting the floor. Then silence again, punctuated by a single, blood-curdling scream that ended abruptly. Guards shouted instructions. Ortega's stomach twisted. This wasn't random violence, it was ritual. Survival was about reading the danger before it read you. When night fell, the prison's interior became almost unrecognizable. Shadows swallowed entire hallways. Light flickered weakly, leaving corners in impenetrable darkness. Ortega lay on his bed, every muscle tense. He could hear whispers, soft, almost conversational. The guards called it paranoia, the inmates called it strategy. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. A prisoner had crossed a line. He wondered if he'd be next. Then came the first real shock. The prison kitchen, a place Ortega assumed was merely a workspace, erupted in violence. An inmate had somehow smuggled a knife, or perhaps it was a sharpened utensil disguised as ordinary tools. The scream that followed was different, deliberate, calculated. Within moments, guards stormed the kitchen, dragging a bloodied body away. Ortega couldn't see the victim's face, but he heard the words muttered by the surviving kitchen staff. "He's been waiting for us." The whispers in the hallway grew louder. Names, warnings, threats. Ortega tried to follow them, piecing together the hierarchy that governed life and death here. Some prisoners had influence, wielded like weapons. Others disappeared for weeks, returned, or didn't. He realized the same applied to guards. Some were fearless, others mere puppets, easily manipulated. Survival meant learning fast and keeping your instincts sharper than your fists. Days blurred into nights. Meals were cold, sometimes missing entirely. Guards barely acknowledged him. One man approached his cell, a former inmate now working as a trustee. His eyes darted nervously before he whispered, "Don't trust anyone. And never, ever go into the north wing." Ortega nodded but didn't ask why. The air itself seemed to hold stories of unimaginable cruelty. Then the revelation came, one that made Ortega question everything. Hidden behind the infirmary, beneath a section of floor tiles that were slightly raised, a secret passage led to what inmates called the cage. Rumors described it as a subterranean holding area for prisoners deemed too dangerous, too defiant, too insane for the general population. Ortega had assumed the stories were exaggerations. He was wrong. The passage reeked of decay. Scratches lined the walls. Chains clinked somewhere deep below. Ortega wasn't the first to notice. He saw the shadows, the signs, the glances exchanged between those in power. The cage wasn't just a prison, it was an arena, a place where only the ruthless thrived and the weak became examples. No one talked about it openly. Those who did never lasted long enough to finish their sentences. The first week ended with another incident. A prisoner attacked an unsuspecting guard in the laundry area. Metal folding tables became weapons. Clothing irons were thrown. The sound of bones breaking was muffled by screams. When the riot subsided, 2 men lay unmoving on the floor, the rest scattering like shadows at dawn. Ortega lay on his bunk, listening. Each heartbeat echoed like a warning. There was no training for this. No preparation. Only instinct and will. But nothing prepared him for the final discovery of the week. During a routine check, a guard dropped a set of keys near his cell. Ortega's eyes caught a faint glint in the corner, and he noticed something impossible. A door behind a supply closet, normally sealed, now slightly ajar. His curiosity piqued. Ortega leaned closer, risking the ire of both inmates and guards. Inside, the faint smell of iron and decay assaulted him. And there, chained to the wall, was a prisoner he recognized, not from the news, not from any public record, but someone he knew personally, someone who had vanished years ago under mysterious circumstances. Alive, yet broken. Eyes wild. Lips whispering, "They're watching. They're always watching." Ortega stumbled back, heart pounding. He realized the prison wasn't merely a place of punishment, it was an experiment in human endurance, a test of sanity, morality, and survival. And in the shadows, he sensed a presence, waiting, watching, measuring. The most evil prison on earth was alive, and it had noticed him. As he sank to the floor, gasping for breath, a single thought dominated his mind. If I survive here, it won't be luck. It will be because I learn faster than anyone else. And I need to start now. The night was thicker than ink, a suffocating veil over the Georgia State Penitentiary. Inside, lights flickered with a sickly rhythm, casting hallways into pools of half-light and shadow. Michael Ortega had survived the first week, barely, but every step felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of unseen predators. The whispers were louder now, not just from the walls but from the prisoners themselves. Every glance carried a threat. Every shadow promised violence. It began with the kitchen. The aftermath of the previous week's attack left the staff shaken. Guards moved faster, shouting orders, but they were just puppets in a larger game. Prisoners had eyes everywhere, and some of those eyes were waiting for a chance to strike. Ortega watched from his cell, noting subtle signals between inmates. A nod, a shift in stance, a glance toward the infirmary. He realized that every prisoner had a network, a hierarchy, and he was an outsider, a target, a test. One evening, as Ortega sat on his bunk, a commotion erupted from the north wing, the forbidden section where whispers said the cage lay hidden. Screams pierced the air, unnatural in their intensity. Guards ran, but hesitation lingered in their movements. They had learned the hard way that this was no ordinary fight. Doors slammed, fists pounded metal, and the echoes were almost celebratory to someone. A prisoner had defied the system, and the repercussions would be catastrophic. Ortega could not sleep. The low hum of the prison at night was alive with menace. The faint metallic scent of blood hung in the air, a constant reminder of what could happen if you faltered. A door creaked somewhere in the distance, slow and deliberate. He held his breath. No sound should be this purposeful unless it carried intent. Then came the messenger. A trustee, a man Ortega had seen whispering to certain prisoners, approached his cell under the veil of darkness. "You want to survive?" he asked, eyes darting like a bird's. "You learn fast or you're gone." The warning was cryptic, but the implication was clear. The cage wasn't just a place, it was the prison's heart of terror. And now Ortega had drawn attention. The next morning, Ortega was escorted to the laundry room, ostensibly for work detail. The room was hot, suffocating, the smell of bleach and detergent mixing with something far fouler. He noticed a trapdoor in the corner, half concealed under stacked laundry carts. The memory of the hidden passage behind the supply closet haunted him. Could this be another entryway to the cage? His pulse quickened at the thought. As he worked, he pieced together a horrifying pattern. Prisoners were being moved discreetly, disappeared for days, sometimes weeks. Guards never questioned it, or maybe they feared it. Rumors whispered that some inmates were subjected to punishments that blurred the line between incarceration and torture. Ortega realized that survival here wasn't just about avoiding fights. It was about understanding the rules of an invisible, deadly game. Then came the betrayal. One inmate, a towering figure with scars crisscrossing his arms like a roadmap of violence, approached Ortega during recreation. "You're new," he hissed, "and you look like meat on the menu. Stick with me, or you'll end up like the others." Ortega nodded, feigning alliance. Trust was currency, and he had none to spend. The man leaned closer, eyes glinting with menace, and whispered a warning. "The cage isn't just a story. It's a promise." The following days were a blur of tension, observation, and careful maneuvering. Ortega learned the subtle art of moving unseen, avoiding certain stairwells, blending with inmate groups, listening to conversations like a hawk. But the cage called to him, not with curiosity, but with inevitability. Every clue pointed there: the whispers, the missing prisoners, the secretive guards who lingered too long in corridors. Ortega's breaking point came during a power outage. Darkness swallowed the block, and for the first time, the prison felt unmoored. Inmates moved like shadows, unseen yet palpable. From the chaos, screams emerged, sharp, frantic, full of panic. He stumbled upon a maintenance room and, through a crack in the wall, saw the entrance to a hidden passage. His heart thundered. This was it. The cage was not a legend. It was real. With nothing but determination and instinct, Ortega crawled through the narrow, filthy tunnel. The air was thick, choking. The walls dripped with moisture, and the metallic scent of blood grew stronger with every step. At the end of the passage, a heavy steel door loomed, reinforced, menacing. A lock hung from its center like a guardian of nightmare. And then he heard it: voices. Not whispers, but full conversations, laughter even, ominous, cruel. Prisoners were inside, some alive, some broken, some screaming. Chains rattled. Metal clanged. It was organized chaos, an underworld governed by rules only they understood. Ortega pressed his ear to the door, trying to discern the hierarchy, the threats, the alliances. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his shoulder. Ortega spun. A shadow detached itself from the corner, a guard. Not a regular one, but someone he had never seen in the daytime. The guard's eyes were dark, almost unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," the man hissed. "And now they know you are." Ortega froze, realizing the truth. The cage was not hidden for oversight. It was hidden to terrify, control, and manipulate. The prison itself was alive, watching, measuring, and punishing any who dared to question its authority. The guard shoved him back into the tunnel and slammed the entrance shut. Darkness swallowed him again, and he understood something chilling. The cage would claim someone tonight, and he might be next if he wasn't careful. By the end of that day, the prison hummed with tension, a slow, predatory rhythm. The screams, the whispers, the shadows, they were all part of a cycle. Ortega had seen the structure of terror, the invisible chains that bound everyone inside. He had learned, reluctantly, that survival depended on knowledge, cunning, and the ability to embrace fear as a weapon. And yet, as he lay on his bunk that night, every muscle taut, every nerve alert, he realized the most horrifying fact. The cage was only the beginning. Somewhere, deeper underground, there were secrets even the whispers hadn't named. And Michael Ortega knew that if he wanted to survive, he would have to descend further into the darkness than anyone had ever dared. The most evil prison on Earth had revealed another layer of itself, and he had just glimpsed the surface. The riot started at 2:17 a.m. It wasn't loud at first. Just a ripple. A metal tray hitting concrete. A shouted insult. Then a crash. Then another. Within seconds, the silence that usually wrapped the prison at night shattered like glass under a hammer. Michael Ortega was already awake. He had been waiting for something to snap. The tension over the past week had been unbearable. Missing inmates, secret movements in the tunnels, guards who looked the other way. The cage wasn't just a punishment chamber. It was leverage. And leverage, when exposed, becomes dangerous. The lights flickered once. Then went out. Darkness swallowed the cell block whole. Screams followed. Not random screams, targeted ones. Brutal. The kind that ended quickly. Ortega slid off his bunk as boots pounded past his cell. Someone slammed into the bars, fingers clawing through the metal. "They're taking over," a voice shouted from down the tier. Somewhere below, glass shattered. An alarm tried to activate but cut off mid-wail. This wasn't chaos. This was coordinated. Through the darkness, Ortega saw shadows moving in formation. Inmates who never spoke to each other now worked side by side. Doors that should have remained locked were opening. Guards weren't responding, because some of them were part of it. A flare of emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the corridor in blood-red glow. Ortega's stomach dropped. The north wing. The path to the cage. A group of prisoners dragged a guard past his cell. The man's uniform was half torn, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You don't understand," the guard gasped. This was containment. It had to be. A fist silenced him. Containment. That word echoed in Ortega's mind. The cage wasn't rogue brutality. It was sanctioned. He felt it then, the final piece sliding into place. The disappearances. The secret guards. The hidden entrances. It wasn't inmates running the cage. It was a collaboration. A pressure valve. Violence redirected downward so it never exploded upward. Until now. A crash rocked the building. Smoke began seeping into the corridor. Ortega's cell door buzzed. Unlocked. His pulse pounded in his ears. This was the moment. Stay put and be swallowed by whatever side won. Or move. He stepped into the corridor. Inmates surged toward the stairwell leading to the lower maintenance levels. Not running blindly, moving with purpose. Someone had given orders. And then Ortega saw him. The scarred inmate who had once offered protection stood at the center of the movement, barking commands like a field general. "It ends tonight," the man shouted. "No more cages. No more disappearances." Ortega followed at a distance. The stairwell door had been welded shut months ago. Now it hung twisted from its hinges. Smoke thickened as they descended. The lower levels were dim, emergency lights casting long skeletal shadows along damp walls. They reached the reinforced steel door. The cage. It was already open. Inside, the truth waited. The room was larger than Ortega imagined. Concrete walls lined with shackles. Drainage grates along the floor. Surveillance cameras mounted in corners. And desks. Administrative desks. Files stacked neatly. This wasn't some hidden inmate dungeon. It was structured, documented, official. One prisoner kicked over a filing cabinet. Papers scattered like snow. Another ripped down a monitor feed, smashing it under his boot. Ortega stepped inside slowly. There were names on those files. Transfer requests. Behavioral reports. Annotations in red ink. Subject escalating. Recommend temporary relocation to sublevel. Temporary relocation. He found another folder. Medical logs. Injury documentation. Not punishment injuries. Experimentation level injuries. Controlled. Measured. And signed. A gunshot cracked through the room. Everyone froze. Smoke poured in from the hallway as armed tactical officers stormed the entrance. On the ground, chaos erupted. Prisoners scattered. Some charged forward. Others dove for cover. Ortega dropped behind a metal desk as rounds slammed into concrete walls. The scarred inmate didn't run. He stood in the center of the cage. "You built this," he roared at the officers. "You fed us to it." Another shot. He fell. Silence fell heavier than the gunfire. One by one, inmates were forced to the floor. Zip ties clicked around wrists. Ortega kept his head down, heart hammering. Boots approached him. A gloved hand grabbed his collar and hauled him up. The officer's visor reflected Ortega's own terrified face. "Wrong place, wrong time," the officer muttered. But Ortega knew that wasn't true. He had seen too much. The riot was crushed before sunrise. Official reports would later call it an inmate uprising triggered by gang conflict. They would mention contraband circulation and internal disciplinary issues. They would not mention the cage. But something had shifted, because the files didn't all burn. Smoke damage had destroyed some evidence, but not all of it. An internal investigation quietly began weeks later. 2 guards resigned abruptly. 1 administrator transferred to another state. The North Wing was sealed permanently. And the cage? Officially, it never existed. Michael Ortega survived. Barely. He was transferred to another facility under vague administrative reasoning. No explanation given. But before he left, a corrections officer, one he'd never seen before, handed him a small envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A photocopy. A report bearing Ortega's own name. Subject demonstrating investigative tendencies. Monitor closely. Date, 3 months before the riot. He had been flagged. Evaluated. Long before he ever found the tunnel. The system had anticipated him. Outside prison walls, investigations faded. News cycles moved on. Public attention shifted elsewhere. But years later, a former corrections employee leaked documents anonymously to a journalist. Blueprints. Sublevel schematics. Expense approvals for behavioral containment infrastructure. The story ran for 48 hours before being buried beneath larger headlines. No criminal charges were filed. No official acknowledgement issued. The prison still stands. Renovated. Modernized. Public tours now describe it as a historic correctional landmark. Visitors walk past sealed corridors without knowing what lies beneath the concrete. And sometimes, former inmates speak quietly about a place underground where the lights never fully turned on. Where punishment wasn't recorded in court documents. Where survival meant silence. Michael Ortega never gave a full interview. But in one rare recorded conversation years later, he said something chilling. "It wasn't the inmates that made it evil," he said. "It was the people who designed the shadows." He paused before adding, "And the worst part? They're still designing them." The most evil prison on earth didn't collapse. It adapted. And somewhere, in another facility, under another layer of concrete and paperwork, a new version of the cage may already exist. Hidden. Documented. Denied. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Make sure to smash that subscribe button, hit like, and drop a comment if you're ready to step into the darkest prison you'll ever hear about. This isn't for the faint of heart.